Okay, so to recap our elementary maths lesson today on probability. The first thing we talked about was the vocabulary or the language of probability. So these were some of the terms that we talked about. Evens, this was a 50-50 chance. So like flipping a coin, it's either going to be heads or tails, and both of them have the equal probability of happening. Likely, something we think will happen. Unlikely, something we think won't happen. And then very likely, very unlikely. Certain and impossible. So certain, definitely going to happen. Impossible, not going to happen. And we talked about randomness. So if we, for instance, we had some counters in a bag, when we chose one at random, it would mean that we did not try to influence our decision of which counter we picked out of the bag. An outcome, that was just something that happens. So a result of an event, for instance, a football match, the outcome would be the score or who won. And then definite was just another way of saying certain. We talked about what this might look like on a scale. So here's a scale that we had. 0 would represent something that was impossible, and 1 would represent something that was certain. And then in the middle, we could have evens, and then likely, and unlikely. So we talked about classifying some events on this scale. The important thing here is that a probability can only be between 0 and 1. And we could express these probabilities with these words, or we could express them as fractions. So for instance, would I have a half, 3/4, 1/4? And we could express them also as decimals or percentages. So it could be, for instance, 25%, or we could also say 0.25. And here we could say 50% or 0.5. And again, we could say that would be 75% or 0.75 for 3/4. So we can express probabilities in lots of different ways. We discussed whether certain events would be impossible, evens, unlikely, likely, or certain. The next thing we talked about was how we could express the probability of an event in a mathematical way. So most commonly we do this using a fraction. So the probability of an event happening is equal to the number of wanted outcomes over the total number of possible outcomes. So for instance here, the probability of flipping a heads, well, the number of wanted outcomes is just heads, and there's only one of them. And on the bottom, the total outcomes, it's either going to be a tails or a head. So we've got 1 over 2. So just a quick example of that. We had rolling a 6-sided dice. So the probability of rolling a 1, well, on the dice, you can either roll a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. So there is only one 1. So on the top, we're going to have a 1, and the total number of possible outcomes is any number from 1 to 6. So there is 6 of them. Similarly, the probability of rolling a 5, there is only one 5 out of 6 possibilities. So that's going to be 1 out of 6. The next question is slightly different, and this was stretching our knowledge on probability a bit. And here it's supposed to say, what is the probability of rolling an even number? Well, we have here 2, 4, and a 6. So we could say there's 3 out of a possible 6, which is the same as a half, or we could say that was evens. There was an even chance. And the last thing we talked about was using the fact that all probabilities add up to 1 to solve problems. So here we've got a bag and it contains red discs, black discs, and green discs. So that's going to add up to 1. It doesn't tell us how many green discs or how many black discs or how many red discs there are, but it does tell us the probabilities. So we know that probability that it's red plus black plus green is going to equal to 1. So we can say that 0.3 plus 0.2 plus green is equal to 1. So we can find that green would be equal to 0.5.